Right, hello. I'm going to introduce our next talk. My name is Matthew Whitman. I'm the curator of the Harvard Theater Collection, and I'm also a board member of the Ephemera Society and a frequent underbidder in Swann Gallery's auctions. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Skye Lacerte. She has been the illustration art specialist at Swann since August 2023. Prior to her time at Swann, she served as the curator of the Dowd Illustrated Research Archive at Washington University in St. Louis, where she worked with original materials created by some of the 19th and 20th century's best-known illustrators and graphic artists. Bella Savignano is the administrator of the Illustration, American, and 19th and 20th century art departments at Swann Galleries. Outside of Swann, she is a writer, archivist, and independent researcher. She has researched the underground rock music scene in 1970s New York City, and it collects ephemera related to early glam rock, the music press, anti-Vietnam War activism, and youth culture. And so I will turn it over to them for their talk, Visual Revolution, the Transformation of Visual Culture and Commentary in the 1960s and 70s.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm short. Can you all hear me? Okay, this is my first Ephemera Society conference. I heard you're all very nice, so I hope that's true. Okay, I'm going to start with our introduction. In the 1960s, magazine illustrators developed an approach to a visual storytelling that both conveyed information and evoked emotion. Their work reflected a social awareness lacking in earlier popular illustration, depicting the changing social and political climate of the time. Concurrently, visual artists across mediums explored symbology, politicizing benign imagery through piracy and reinterpretation. By using unauthorized popular materials in their subversive works, they created new ideas and challenged a culture that marginalized them. In this presentation, Bella and I are going to be exploring how popular cultural ideas and media were redefined by two distinct groups: the underground artists who were commenting on the changing world and the illustrators who were documenting it. So in order to look at the changes that happened in the 50s or the 60s and 70s, we need to look at what was happening before. So the post-war era of the 1950s saw the family become a central theme in visual culture and society, and therefore in the magazines that people bought. This is when famous illustrator Norman Rockwell's art became the standard representation of the American family. His covers for the Saturday Evening Post, as you know, are some of the most well-known illustrations ever. Other illustrators followed Rockwell's lead. Themes like family and love were lighthearted and conventional. Styles varied, but the general appearance was the same, which is detailed, idealized, figurative, stylized, and realistic, with bold, bright colors and an absence of painterly application. Culturally, pressure for women to assume traditional gender roles led to the depictions of women as housewives, as mothers, or single girls longing for love and marriage. They were mostly seen participating in domestic tasks like sewing and cooking, and completely consumed with thoughts of their male counterparts. Gender-specific magazines like Ladies' Home Journal were targeted to stay-at-home mothers as well as working women, as they were generally the largest group of consumers at the time. It's important to note that magazines at this time did not address the needs of women outside their limited target audience, which were white, middle-class married women. African-American women were almost entirely depicted as service providers to white consumers. Otherwise, they remained invisible. Marginalized communities were ignored by advertising agencies and magazines, even though they were reading and purchasing just as much as white women. In a nutshell, magazine illustration of the 1950s reflected the conservative and regressive values of this time. Towards the end of the 1950s and into the 60s, magazine illustration changed, and there are a few reasons for this. One reason is that publishers began to abandon traditional illustration for the efficiency of photography, turning away from the elaborate and captivating cover illustrations of the golden era. To compete with this, illustrators adapted their style, technique, and content. This is the first magazine cover for Ladies' Home Journal that featured a photograph on the front. And from this point on, photography dominated the cover pages. Another reason for this change is that as middle-class women joined the workforce and increasingly became active in the public sphere, men became a target audience for magazines and publishers. The focus in magazines drifted away from traditional subjects and shifted to personal development, social commentary, and relationships. That was the last one. Magazine illustrations of this era showcased the artistic avant-garde, presenting complex information in an adventurous yet accessible way. Echoing the abstract expressionism of the 1950s and 60s, the artwork was unconventional and expressionistic and celebrated individualism. So during this period of change in the world, the role of an illustrator had to evolve. This shift is referred to as new illustration. New illustration became the norm, and magazines were becoming more socially conscious. On the left here is an advertisement with an illustration by James Montgomery Flagg, who was the creator of the standard representation of Uncle Sam from his World War I iconic poster, "I Want You." The image was actually used on a magazine cover before it was turned into a political poster, a propaganda poster. Flagg used this image for numerous campaigns for years after, including this recruitment advertisement from 1948. On the right is Seymour Quast's 1968 interpretation of Uncle Sam for another poster, not only significantly altering and updating its appearance, but also turning the message on its head from patriotism to anti-war activism. New illustrators at this time redefined the purpose of narrative art, explicitly portraying and commenting on poverty, crime, activism, race, and youth culture. This is an original illustration by Robert Weaver. Not only is the style radical, but unconventional materials were also used. So this was painted on a piece of cardboard that was just probably found or something he had sitting around. And you can see the creases, and it's not a perfect square or anything. And there are also paint swatches that are pasted to the board. As I stated earlier, leaders in the realm of new illustration developed an approach to visual storytelling that both conveyed information and evoked emotion. Their work reflected a social awareness lacking in earlier popular illustration, depicting the changing social and political climate of the 1960s. This automobile advertisement on the left is very straightforward and typical of the 1940s and 50s. It features a farmer, his son, in the background of a car driving around. In the middle is a page from Look magazine, done by the illustrator Austin Briggs. This issue of Look was devoted to the civil rights movement after a particularly violent summer of activism in 1965. On the right, you can see the detail from the earlier advertisement above, from the background, and then with that wholesome scene of a farmer and his son. Below it is a detail from the Look article, and this close-up features a more realistic view of field workers in the background. And you could barely even see this on the page of Look magazine, but it was still important to the point of view of the artist, regardless. Many of these illustrators became known for their vivid visual style, and magazine art directors put very little in the way of restrictions on them and encouraged them to break the rules for their innovative magazines. Some illustrators blurred the lines between artistic fields as well. So Saul Steinberg, who made this New Yorker cover on the left here, he was working as a commercial artist while at the same time creating fine art that was sold in galleries and hung in museums. Milton Glaser, who made this Time magazine cover on the right, was one of the founders of Pushpin Studios. And that was the influential design studio that blended historic styles with contemporary pop culture. So like many of the artists that worked at Pushpin, Glaser both worked as an illustrator and as a graphic designer. Magazines like Fortune and Esquire became more radical and took new risks, reflecting the changing values and interests of its readers. Artwork featured in the magazines during this period echoed this transformation and was fittingly innovative. New illustrators believed that art and illustration were very closely allied, and sought to include personal expression, commentary, and narratives into their work. This philosophy changed the field of illustration, when most illustrators were considered craftspeople or commercial artists who decorated pages but didn't comment. For example, this illustration on the left, all three illustrations were published in magazines, and they were by Robert Weaver. The one on the left is for an article from Look magazine in 1971. It was making a statement about the disproportionate number of untried prison inmates to the number of judges. The drawing on the right is from an article right after the 1967 election, and the article is about civil rights and equality for the Black population specifically. So illustration evolved from what you see is what you get to conceptual, not only because of the issues and the themes that they were portraying and covering, but because of the styles and techniques that were used to convey the emotion of the message as well. So here's an example of an earlier style. This is from a magazine Coronet from 1946, depicting a crime scene, a murder. The elements that I'm looking at are the very photorealistic patterns on the carpet and wallpaper, elements that really don't have much to do with the story or a violent murder, but are mostly decorative and without analysis. Still very well done, though. Compare that image to this one by Robert Weaver and his open-ended expressionistic form of realism. This article is about youth gangs and crime from Life magazine in the late 1950s. Weaver is regarded as one of the founders of New Illustration. He was interested in form in his work, but he was not interested in creating pristine imagery or in covering up his process. He wanted the viewer to, quote, see that this is a piece of artwork that is being done, actually see the workings of it. He didn't want to conceal the actions of his methods. New Illustration also saw a return to the reportage drawing of earlier wartime artists. Illustrators would draw on the spot and try to capture the action and feelings of the moment, rather than compose immaculate scenes and embellish the page. Ronald Searle, who was well known for his humorous cartoons, also did reportage work, such as this, from a series of drawings about life in Paris. Reportage of the New Illustration combined the visual ideas of fine art with the responsibility of a journalist. Artists ventured out from the studio into the world and used their pencils to observe, record, and draw real-life-based visual essays. Magazines and their illustrators were becoming more socially conscious. For these jobs, illustrators weren't concerned with creating polished drawings. They were taking notes like a journalist in the field. Shel Silverstein's Fire Island article for Playboy was a humorous and insightful piece capturing the wild, eccentric, and carefree summer culture of Fire Island in the 1960s. Blending satire with vivid storytelling, Silverstein documented the island's unique mix of partygoers, artists, free-spirited beach dwellers, offering readers a witty first-hand glimpse into its bohemian atmosphere. Sports Illustrated happened to be one of the magazines that was pretty innovative and artistic at the time, and was one of a handful of publications in the 60s that sent artists out on assignment to work directly from life. So compare the ad on the left from earlier that focuses on the star player with the spectators, the field, and the action happening in the background. And compare that to the other image here from Tommy Ungerer from 1962. This was documenting the Kentucky Derby. His work showcases the athletes and the action, but doesn't focus on any individual sports stars, and includes minor participants like the spectators. Here's an example from Sports Illustrated, who commissioned Robert Weaver to attend spring training in 1962. He created a wide range of drawings, some of which are shown on the left of the screen. When put together, they give a complete sense of the event. He returned home and then used those drawings to create the paintings that were then published in the magazine. This one on the right is a 2-page spread, and it's a good example of the way Weaver included tangential information from an event to capture the moment by using a point of view from below the stadium while creating a small but prominent frame up in the right-hand corner that focuses on the typical action of the game. So, New Illustration movement fused bold, eclectic styles with playful conceptual storytelling, breaking from traditional realism to embrace distinctive art, pop culture, and graphic experimentation. And this spirit carries into the work of underground artists at the time, which is what Bella is going to focus on now.
Thank you, Skye, for taking us through this revolution in illustration art. I agree that there's a great through line between the commercially working artists of the time, the social and political climate that they were working within, and the work of artists and political and social movements in the underground. So I'd like to continue to talk about that. This is a Xerox copy by the artist John Dowd, who in 1973 hijacked a Xerox machine and copied over 200 images from popular culture, magazine covers, comics, Disney characters, and music magazines. He bound these scans into a publication called From Dowdaland Archives, which chronicled the types of imagery he was using in his earlier works, such as the music-centered periodical The Star from 1969 and Fanzine Fanzini from 1972, which he created in collaboration with fellow artist John Jack Balin. This action in and of itself was an act of resistance. Not only was he infringing on intellectual property laws and misrepresenting his identity, he was reappropriating carefully construed imagery for his own use, ideas, and politics. Dowd, whose Dowdaland moniker itself mirrors Disneyland, often used cartoons and innocuous imagery in his work, which was rooted firmly in politics and in gay liberation. Here we see the use of a Disney imagery in a way that Disney would never sign off on, Mickey Mouse beneath, effectively presenting Dowd's exposed bum. This was a broadside from the John Dowd Fanny Club, a semi-fictitious fan club that developed as a humorous response to another semi-fictitious John Dowd fan club. He saw the power in using popular images, their effectiveness as an attention-grabbing form of advertisement that he could remove from their original context and redefine. Dowd was a pioneer in using popular imagery in his art, which maintained underground but nonetheless accomplished his mission, if only for the limited number of people in his male art circle. Dowd's reappropriation of Disney imagery did not come out of nowhere. In 1955, Walt Disney described the new Disney park in a speech as a location dedicated to the ideals, the dreams, and the hard facts that have created America. But what America was Disney setting out to represent? Shortly after the park opened, Disney started hosting date nights, explicitly stating that couples only are allowed on the dance floor, male, female. This rule was enforced by officers in the park, who were quick to break up any individuals of same-sex dancing together. It wasn't until a 1980 lawsuit and a 1984 victory that this rule was overturned. The lawsuit was filed by a young Andrew Exler, who at 19 was already a strong gay activist in his community. After learning of a lesbian friend's negative interaction with an officer who told her she could not dance with another woman, he staged an intervention, where he and a group of his young gay friends turned up to the Tomorrowland Terrace to commit the heinous act of dancing while gay. A security guard later reflected that the teens dancing together represented an alternate lifestyle that wasn't in keeping with the traditional aspects of the company, of what Disneyland represents. Despite Disney being an architect of wonder, a purveyor of imagination, and the creators of a world where animals can speak and pigs can fly, they couldn't even fathom a dance floor where LGBT couples could dance together. So here's a political cartoon by Tom Johnson, published in the Daily Pilot in 1980, where two Mickey Mouse figures walking side by side are being chased by two men with a mousetrap. 9 years later, Exler repurposed the cartoon in This Invitation, where he invited his friends to celebrate the anniversary of when he was prohibited from dancing with a male friend at Disney. He makes a note at the bottom asking attendees to wear a pink triangle or another emblem of pride to visually make clear that they are everywhere. Disney and other popular cartoon imagery were the leading graphic representation of a slew of mainstream cultural ideals and became a perfect conduit for projecting underground ideology. The appropriation of popular imagery showed up in a number of important cultural movements and products. Chuck Jones, the animator who revamped Porky Pig's character, writes, "Porky responding on behalf of the audience makes us realize the true craziness of what we are seeing." Of course, Jones writes this in reference to Porky and Friends' silly escapades, but it's a telling statement when paired with his characterization here. In this poster, published in 1972, Porky is depicted as a cop. His badge and hat say pig, which is not just an obvious nod to his species, but a reference to the revolutionary movements of the 60s and 70s who referred to the police as such. In this depiction, Porky maintains his silly, jovial personification despite his baton, and the acerbic statement that also became a cornerstone of political movements at this time, "Up against the wall, motherfucker," said in his signature Porky stutter. Something like this would have been a very affordable graphic way to get one's message across, and the message here seems to be that the cops, though a violent and honest threat to the left's anti-war liberatory sentiments, are ultimately viewed as a joke and a cartoonish parody of the law and order that they seek to enforce. In the US, the Black Panthers popularized the use of pig to describe the actions of the police and the political power they fought against. Here we see the word used in the Black Panther Community News Service, the weekly periodical of the Black Panther Party. The publication kept readers up to date with political goings-on and happenings within the group. Pig was the choice word for police officers, politicians, and anyone who represented repressive political ideology. They often represented these figures with illustrations and cartoons of pigs. On the right is an image of an unidentified activist who is suspected to be a government informant, and his picture is labeled pig so that others in the movement could be aware that he was of his infidelity to the anti-war cause. This is a great moment, I think, to call back to Skye's slides, specifically the Robert Weaver works that showed related to policing and racial equality. What Weaver so beautifully depicts, the inequity of Black citizens in America and the systemic problems within the judicial system, is published in a magazine in a more digestible, public-friendly way than the sometimes abrasive Black Panther messaging, which was really meant to be a peer-to-peer sort of discussion of what was going on. In 1968, a group of anti-war youth protesters called the Yippies famously took over the Democratic National Convention. They nominated a pig named Pegasus for president. They joked that Pegasus could really bring home the pork, and if we can't have him in the White House, we can have him for breakfast. Their political activism was theatrical and tongue-in-cheek, using this pig as a conduit to emphasize the absurdity of what they felt was going on in US politics. These are a few examples of pins or badges that epitomize the activism of the Yippie movement. These symbols are acted almost as a coded language for other like-minded youth. This pig-shaped badge, a classic cartoon depiction, but with sunglasses, is from the Roz Payne 60s archive. The other is a spoof on the classic political badge, noting the place and event with the cartoon pig depicted in the center instead of a politician. The same graphic was used on the cover of the Free Toilet, a crudely made pamphlet with underground resources for services like abortion, housing for runaways, and various underground media outlets alongside poetry. Another underground publication was the International Times, a newspaper that updated readers on the happenings of the political underground. This edition advertises a special pop supplement, and the cover features a somewhat disturbing, diabolical-looking Mickey Mouse smoking a joint. He's surrounded by a spiral that is encompassed by the words yes, repeated over and over, as if to say yes to the countercultural movement the International Times represented, or to say yes to drugs. The pop supplement didn't have anything really to do with Disney. It was just a list of experimental artists that the International Times endorsed. They were a London-based publication, but Disney was a multinational company and recognized globally, so his characterization here still landed with the audience. Another UK-based entity that appropriated Disney was Mr. Freedom. The boutique was known for their vibrant, cheeky pop art designs and for outfitting what seemed to be the entirety of the hip underground crowd in London. They went to Disney to ask if they could make t-shirts featuring their characters, which Disney said no one had asked to do before. I don't have a record of whether or not there was actual approval or what the extent of Disney's involvement in their collection was, but I doubt they could have seen their precious family-friendly imagery becoming this. These are two photos published in German underground magazines, and here we see Disney clothing being worn in sexually charged photos. This image was also particularly shocking. We see the Mickey Mouse jacket worn with the Bumster jeans designed in 1970 by Diana Cranshaw. The left is an an iron-on transfer featuring Donald Duck that I found in a shoebox of ephemera and records from the clothing store Jumpin' Jack Flash in New York. I will make it quick. Mr. Freedom was known for their characterized takes on the exports of capitalist society and parodied elements of American popular culture like fast food and football. They even briefly opened a restaurant called Mr. Freedom. This is the uniform of a server at the restaurant, a necklace sold by Mr. Freedom, and on the right is an advertisement for the store where we see a number of cartoon characters in the background, almost as to say that these characters are serving these new ideas. And here is a feature in Design magazine. The journalist writes of flies purposely put in the soup and the napkins, which had Mae West's face superimposed on a photo of the Statue of Liberty. So Mr. Freedom was based on the 1969 film of the same name, which was a satirical movie about anti-war political activism. The United States is depicted in the film as a sort of racist boogeyman beholden to the American corporate interest. In the counterculture magazine Evergreen, William Klein, the director, tells the interview that Mr. Freedom is all of the Westmorlands, the MacArthurs, the pinup boys of the war. Dr. Freedom, who is the bad guy who gives the orders, represents the system and its leaders. The same image appears on a poster to the left. A few years earlier, in 1967, Klein contributed to Far From Vietnam, which was a film created by a group of revolutionary filmmakers that aimed to make a strong anti-war statement. Here are two posters from that, one from the Argentine release and the other from the Japan release. He found that despite the press, despite the important names in the film who were involved in its making, people didn't want to sit down and watch the honest, gut-wrenching truth of what was happening. So he makes this parody film, which has all the drama and the spectacle alongside the important political message. In the vein of this political commentary, here are a few bonuses that are a little bit later in time period that I thought were too great to ignore. This is a French poster that shows solidarity with the Chilean and Polish workers' rights movements. After the government had approved their free trade union called Solidarity, 80% of state employees joined, and it was promptly shut down. In a similar situation in Chile, where a repressive government threatened by increasing calls for workers' rights is threatened by the influence of the workers. So this poster, I think, is really brilliant because it captures the US corporate interest in the sort of meddling in different countries' affairs. We see Mickey Mouse, grander in size and almost in control of Lady Liberty, who represents freedom. This idea sort of speaks to the global leftist view of American politics in this time, and the idea that corporations and corporate greed not only trampled our own country's alleged values, but on the rights of other citizens. The poster on the right was in response to the Persian Gulf War, and it features a Bart Simpson, who is very famous at this time. He has nothing to do with the war itself, but he is frequently seen on posters in anti-Gulf War activism because of his place in American popular culture. So I'll round this up with one more sentiment about cartoons and animation and illustration. They've long held a dichotomous purpose. On one hand, they're a pivotal element of childhood media. They're allegorical and silly and cute. But on the other hand, they're an incredibly powerful tool of political dissent. The role of political cartoons in popularizing ideas and translating concepts into bite-sized, memorable pieces of media cannot be understated. Unlike real people, a cartoon or animation is a somewhat anonymous, two-dimensional, and lacking in the nuance of personhood. Pushing one's message through a flamboyant drag queen, a leather-clad Black Panther, or a scruffy long-haired hippie is less likely to catch the general public's opinion in a positive way than something they already know and love. In the underground, being able to latch onto something was their best chance at breaking into the mainstream. Utilizing popular images not only allowed these denizens to get the attention of people who may not normally listen to their message, but in co-opting popular, socially acceptable, and beloved images, the underground was able to change the meaning and project their own values onto popular American culture. That's all we have.
I don't see any questions.
Here's one down here.
Okay.
On some of your images, you credit the Roz Payne archive. Who was that?
Roz Payne was a political activist and photographer who did a lot of brilliant documentation of a lot of anti-war movements, and she has a phenomenal collection of things that have been collected in ephemera from the various social and political movements that she photographed, but it was also involved in a personal level. As you saw, some of those great Yippee badges and such, and the photograph also came from her collection.
Has it been placed or is it hers?
It has been placed. I
Where?
could not tell you off the top of my head. I will find it in my notes and find you right after.
Hi, thank you. This was so amazing to listen to. One thing that really surprised me is looking at Disney characters and how adamant they are today and like about them not being used, probably in response to stuff like this. And of course, the continuance of this being used for it. And so a question I sort of had is, given the just range of today's political climate, do you see stuff like this continuing to be made at the same level of that it was produced back then? Or do you think that because there is now this obstacle that they know Disney is probably going to sue if they use these images, that it's sort of backed off a little bit?
Yeah, I think the use of the internet and spreading a lot of political and cultural ideas sort of puts a swift shut down on people using copyrighted material. It would take seconds, minutes, hours for large corporations to be able to identify uses of their material against their interests, and we see that with music and such being copyrighted immediately. And they have entire teams of lawyers now on the case. So I couldn't bring up a specific case of someone getting away with it now, just because, or at least on a large scale, just because it's so heavily policed, and it's a lot harder to track down the creators of a flyer or a poster that has been sort of distributed in the underground than it is to identify someone who posted on a public Instagram account with their name attached to it.
Absolutely. It's, as you were saying that, I was also thinking about like meme culture that's coming about and how there really isn't a way to pinpoint where it starts, but you see stuff like this coming through with that as well.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you, Bella and Skye. Great to see you representing the department. Yay. Great talk. So I will ask the commercial question side of it. In terms of the collecting, I don't know if any of the pieces, I couldn't see the captions because I'm sitting back here, but were any of the pieces things that came up for auction? And then as a general question, what is the collecting market like for this type of material in terms of availability and pricing?
So what you couldn't read is that these all came from my previous position at the Washington University in St. Louis special collection of illustration there. So no, none of them have been up to auction that I know of. Those aren't the originals, obviously. A lot of them were the tear sheets. And your second question was, how people, it's not taking off the way a Rockwell would or a Leyendecker, as you probably know. But I do think there is more of an audience now as people learn more about this era of illustration that comes after Rockwell and L. Parker and all of the big greats from the golden era. So I think it's growing, and it's getting a lot more attention than it used to. It's also extremely influential to illustrators who are working today. So that's kind of building the momentum as well. Yeah.
As for the second part, for my part, this little Donald Duck actually was at Swann. But the rest of the material, I think, is the collection base is still building. We're bringing the subculture sale back in April for its second year at Swann, which I've been heavily involved in. And we're really working to build the market in these sort of underground works where the name of the artist is less important than the cultural or social value of the message and the art that we're presenting. So.